How does the Westminster system of parliamentary democracy work in Canada, and how does it differ from a presidential system like that of the United States? In Canada, the Westminster system of parliamentary democracy forms the foundation of how the government operates, and it differs significantly from the presidential system in the United States. One of the core distinctions is the integration of the executive and legislative branches in Canada, where the Prime Minister and Cabinet are members of Parliament, unlike the US where the President is separate from Congress. In Canada, the Prime Minister is the leader of the political party that holds the most seats in the House of Commons after a general election. While Canadians vote for their local members of Parliament, MPs, it's the party with the most seats that forms the government, and their leader becomes the Prime Minister. This differs from the US system, where voters indirectly elect the President through the Electoral College, making the executive branch separate from the legislature. In the Canadian system, the Prime Minister must maintain the confidence of the House of Commons. This means that they must have the support of the majority of MPs to govern effectively. If the government loses a confidence vote, such as failing to pass a budget, it can trigger the dissolution of Parliament and lead to a new election. This constant need for parliamentary support ensures that the Prime Minister is always accountable to elected representatives, unlike the US President, who serves a fixed 4-year term unless impeached by Congress. The role of the monarch in Canada, while largely ceremonial, remains part of this system. It should also be noted that the King of Canada, His Majesty, King Charles III, exists in a legally distinct office from that of the King of the United Kingdom. While both offices are vested in the same person, they are completely different legal entities. The monarch's powers are exercised by the Governor-General at the federal level and by lieutenant governors at the provincial level. AI mispronounces, lieutenant. While these representatives rarely intervene in political matters, they hold reserve powers that can be used in exceptional circumstances, such as dissolving Parliament or appointing a new Prime Minister if needed. However, these powers are almost always exercised based on the advice of the elected government. A notable example of the limited but significant role of the monarch's representative occurred recently in British Columbia. Following a closely contested election, the provincial viceroy was advised to call a new election. However, considering that the previous election had just been held, the provincial viceroy used her discretion to reject the advice and instead appointed a new premier who could command the confidence of the legislature. This demonstrates that while rare, the reserve powers exist to ensure stability in moments of political uncertainty. In contrast, the US president does not rely on maintaining the confidence of Congress to stay in power, and the executive branch operates independently from the legislative branch. The president can enact policies through executive orders and veto legislation, but they do not need to seek legislative approval in the same way the Canadian Prime Minister does. Ultimately, the Westminster system of parliamentary democracy ensures that the government is closely tied to Parliament and that the Prime Minister is held accountable by elected MPs. While the monarch and their representatives play a largely ceremonial role, their involvement in rare cases serves as a constitutional safeguard. This structure differs from the more rigid separation of powers seen in the US, where the president is elected separately and operates with more executive autonomy. Both systems have their own checks and balances, but Canada's parliamentary model emphasizes constant accountability to the legislature, making it a dynamic and responsive form of government.